Well, once again, I'd like to welcome everyone to our fourth and final multi-district leadership development seminar. We have been so pleased with the attendance that we've had and the comments that we've received. And so we really want to thank you on behalf of my classmates, Denise Donato from 7190, Rocky Martinez from 7170, and Jerry Sequin from 7150. Tonight, we're going to have a program on financial awareness. And we have two presenters from 7120. Is a member of the Newark Rotary Club and for District 7120. District Conference Chair twice. He was a glutton for punishment and on several committees. He is a multiple Paul Harris Fellow, past club president, past club treasurer, and past club membership chair. Scott is a certified public accountant and founder of Scott Healy CPA, a accounting, consulting, and tax firm. He also serves on as chair, treasurer, and trustee for several nonprofit organizations. Scott's other hobbies and interests include spending time with his family, playing and watching golf, and Syracuse University football and basketball. Our other co-presenter is Doug Forge, and he also is a licensed CPA in New York, and he has worked in public accounting for almost 33 years. And he has worked with Scott Healy, CPA in Newark, New York for the past 19 years. He has been a member of the Newark Rotary Club since 2005, serving as club treasurer for 2 years and as a board member for 2 terms. He has been involved in the Newark community, serving on the boards of the Greater Newark Chamber of Commerce and the Newark Arcadia Historical Society. Doug is the proud father of 2 sons, Dane and Evan, and in his spare time, he loves to travel and follow the local sports teams. We had made a comment earlier, Newark Rotary, Bloomfield Rotary, Halmack Rotary, and Twin City Lions Club for 29 years had an organization called RL Concessions. And this was an organization put together to be the food providers at the Hill Cumorah pageant. And we were a for-profit entity, and Doug managed to keep all of us out of jail for 29 years. And we are so grateful for his efforts doing that. With that, I will turn the program over to Scott, but I'd like to say, I'm sure that there will be some questions. If you could put the questions in the chat, we will get to them after the presentation. And Norma and I will then feed the questions to Doug and to Scott. So please use the chat for questions. Scott, it's all yours.
Thanks, Ralph. Appreciate it. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm going to try to start my screen share here and put the presentation up. Is that up there now? Everybody see it?
We're good.
We're good. All right. Just to give you an overview, I assume most of you have not served as presidents, nor many of you have probably served as treasurers. So our objective tonight is not to make you a club treasurer, and it's not to give you quite as much education as you might need to be in that kind of a finance role, but it's more to be aware of all those things going on within your club and around your club so that you can be better positioned to make sure that all the obligations are met and that the people who in your club who are charged with carrying out those tasks are have the right tools and resources to do that. So we've kind of broken down this presentation into 4 little segments: a club budget, club finances, taxes, and risk management. So we're going to kind of cover each little segment in its by itself, and we'll have it probably may be worth considering soliciting some questions at the end of each section just to keep things, you know, fresh in people's minds. So that'll be fine with us. If there's any questions that come in, Ralph and Norma, you want to, you know, chime in with those. So We're going to start off, and Doug is going to talk about your club budget.
Thank you, Scott. Hello, everybody. One of the things that's very important for any business or not-for-profit and a Rotary Club is having a budget in place. And ironically, it's March 3rd, so this is the time that you need to actually start your budget process for your incoming year starting July 1st. Probably the best thing to do is to establish the setting up of a budget committee, which could be, probably your current treasurer, as well as other members of your club or even some board members. But ultimately, you want to set up a budget worksheet, which, yep, I just saw that. But so one of the things, one of the biggest revenues probably most clubs will have is their membership dues, because the dues kind of drive the revenue stream at the beginning of or generally during the year, and as well as fundraisers and other things. But and obviously one of the best ways to do that is to kind of look at what your figures were in the past, maybe even for the prior year or a prior budget, to kind of get some guidance as to what numbers we're looking at or what expected changes you might have from this year to next year. But obviously you want to also review all the income and expense categories of your budget process. Like I said, dues, fundraisers, or big income grants, possible, but you do have day-to-day club expenses. Most clubs don't have an office site or anything, so they don't really have a rental cost or a utility bill most likely, but you do have costs. Each club has different things, printing and office supplies and so on. So, that just want to be sure that you plan and consider planned or expected changes that you might foresee for your year. Every year is a little different. And just want to be sure if you have a new fundraiser, maybe a budget in what you expect that new fundraiser to, what you expect it to gross for the current, that new Rotary year. And also you need to be realistic with your amounts in the budget. And what I mean by that is you just, maybe kind of based on the prior year budget and look at the prior year, just kind of gauge what you foresee to be a pretty good estimate of what those expenses for the different categories, as well as the different categories of income. If you expect a 5 or 10 new members, you'd want to adjust your dues revenue by that amount, just to kind of keep it up to date. The other key portion of the budget process is obviously at some point, once a budget is generated, it has to be approved. Generally, this is going to be submitted to the board of directors of your Rotary Club for their review and approval, and that'll be their chance to ask any questions or offer their input. But ultimately, once the budget is approved, that will drive and determine actually what your club's dues will be for the upcoming year. Not really saying that you're going to change your dues all the time, but as we all know, costs are going up these days, and so for Rotary Club, their costs are going to go up too. So you need to be aware of how much your dues should be to kind of cover some of your fixed costs, such as RI, Rotary International dues, and your district dues, as well as other things special to your club.
Doug, I'm going to try to throw that budget worksheet back.
Oh, okay, there you go. So we've found a kind of a template of a budget, with different operations, income operations, as it says, membership dues, admission fees, other income. I mean, you could have fundraisers down below. Each club may have its own fundraiser. Like in our club in Newark, the big one's always our chicken barbecue. So, those are things that need to be segregated out in your different income levels. And then, of course, just like a business, you need to have all your expenses broken out into different categories. Badges and other Rotary Rotary Club supplies, postage, printing, phone fax, website costs. I think a lot of clubs have done Club Runner. I know our club in Newark does that, so that's $600-700 a year. As well as other supplies and things. And obviously, one of the biggest expenses for a club each year is their RI dues that they pay, twice a year, as well as your respective district. The district you're in, you're going to generally pay a per member fee to your district, and that's usually due the first part of the beginning of the new year in July, August of the new year. And there again, we list other things. So basically, at the end of the day, incomes versus your expenses, you basically have a rough idea where your club should come in. And one of the things I know we do in our club is we do look at the budget every so often. Not saying you have to, but maybe review it every few months and just kind of see where you're at for that, like a quarter to date, maybe at the end of September compared to your year-to-date budget, and maybe some things have changed income or expense wise, and that may be the time to just kind of reevaluate things at that point, because the budget's always it's a starting point for your new year, but it doesn't necessarily have to be set in stone. It can be modified during the year. So so at the I believe you're going to get a packet of all these emailed to you, the budget spreadsheet and our presentation and so on. So you'll have a chance to review that in a little more detail on your own time.
Thanks, Doug. I'll just add on the budget, I think many of you should have some sort of a process already established in your club. If your club treasurers have served, previously, sometimes that's a great, a great start. They know more about this process than an incoming president. And, the form and format of how you do this may be a little bit different from club to club, but the idea is the same. So this is just an example of a starting point. You can make that whatever is appropriate in your own club and area. So any questions that we have that jump on?
There was one question raised about the three-part budget process where you separate operations from philanthropy and fundraising.
Yeah, Scott, that was my question, because we're concerned that we're not spending fundraised money for club operations. So that we keep a separate sheet to make sure that anything we spend on operations, I know you have a complete budget and it's all there, but our issue is that we want to keep a separate sheet for operations where the dues support operations in from the members out to RI in the district. And then any fundraising we do for projects, we list the specific projects and make sure that our fundraising is in there. I don't know if that's too much work, but it seems to assure us and assure our members that we're not spending for committee expenses on money that we're raising.
Yeah, I think that's a great question and a great point. I think how clubs do that individually probably varies a little bit depending on maybe how they do their finances. If they're using QuickBooks or something else to do the record keeping, there's ways that you can kind of segregate that. If you're doing it very simply, you may do just as you suggested. You just have a separate column for fundraising, and then I'd say the philanthropic part of what your club's doing with that fundraised money, so that you can kind of keep track of that separately. This budget, as an example, kind of has it separated into sections that somewhat accomplish that, but how you do it is up to you. And the important part is just to realize that the intent for the fundraised money isn't to be spent on, your club operations, as you stated. Doug, anything to add?
No, I think those are good questions. Yeah, I think it is important that some clubs, if they can, that they obviously should segregate the operational costs, income and expense of your club versus the fundraising side and how those fundraising funds are expended. I think that's important to your membership that they know that.
Doug or Scott, there's a couple questions coming in about how to, how you separate and pay for operating expenses from charitable expenses. And I know at some point in the presentation, you talk about keeping separate accounts.
Yeah, I think that's coming up shortly, but yeah, very briefly, that's the idea. I think a lot of clubs will just keep, literally separate bank account and run those fundraised dollars through that bank account. So it really keeps the records clean and neat. Revenue in and expenses out of each different account are unique to that type of, revenue and expense. How many accounts you need to do that is a club, decision based on the activities and the types of things you do. I think it's overkill to consider, a separate account for every type of project or fundraiser, but in total, separating operations and fundraising can be a good financial step. Anything else for now?
Nope,
Ralph?
nope, we're good right now.
All right, we're going to move on to a little more about the club finances. So one of the things that's always a challenge is trying to get involved enough to understand, what your club's financial policies and guidelines are. Most clubs are going to have some policies and procedures already in place, and it's just your responsibility now to make sure that you have the opportunity to get familiar with that, so that you understand who's supposed to take care of what. Club treasurer is usually going to handle most of that, but there can be responsibilities on different, officers or board members in some cases. Who will be authorized check signers on the bank accounts? We just talked about if we had, and whether there will be separate bank accounts. It's entirely possible that if you have a fundraising account, the signers on the account might be different than the operations account. You might decide that a chair for the committee may be the right person, but the most important element here is to know who it is, what the policy is, and how do you stick with the policy. As an example, a lot of times it's suggested to have a second check signer, or to consider a policy that requires a second approver or a second signer for something out of the ordinary or above a certain dollar threshold. So those are all club decisions on policy on how far you want to go with that. And again, whether you keep separate accounts or don't, there's probably no mandate to do that, except for a few things. If you're working with maybe grant money, that might be an example. If you've actually been advanced grant money as part of the project, many grants are not funded until completion. So at that point, you've already earned it back. It's probably a little bit better. Understanding what your payment approval process is. I know even in our club, being treasurer was always fun. Every meeting you walk out with a couple of slips of paper and Post-it notes. Somebody needs or wants something. But you should understand what that is. Nobody should be coming up to the podium at a meeting and asking the president to approve, payment of some bill for an expense for a fundraiser or a project. There should be a process for that. And if that's not the process, that's not how it should happen. It should follow the. In another big area, Doug touched on it from a budget standpoint, is setting your club dues and how you go about billing those dues, timing and collection. There's a variety of practices out there. Clubs bill, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually. Our newer club, we just bill annually, all up front, 100%. So it's important to know what you do and what's expected, and how to follow up when there are unpaid balances and how long you let that ride. We'll talk about why that matters a little bit further on. Knowing and understanding, what the record keeping process is and who's storing records. Again, the treasurer is probably, taking care of that responsibility, but we're a volunteer organization and those offices change, sometimes every year or on some frequency. records have to move around, and there should be just an awareness that the club is a tax, a tax entity, might not pay taxes, but it has an obligation to preserve those records for at least a few years. And, knowing where they are and how to get access if you need to is important. Another important element is what your financial reporting practices will be. How often will you report and review things with your board? How often do you report to the club? And what level of detail do you, provide at each of those intervals? I think in most cases, clubs, boards meet regularly, whether that's monthly or quarterly. And they're probably going to review finances on that regular meeting schedule. But many clubs don't report on, a full financial report to the entire club membership more than a couple times a year. So that's just a club practice, and you should, be familiar with what your club's established for that and be prepared, with your treasurer to be able to meet that. The last item on this slide is what's your approval process for non-budgeted items? We've all just lived through a couple of years of COVID, and I'm pretty sure that none of us had a budget for hand sanitizer, masks, or anything else. And we probably, spent a little bit of money on some of those things. So just understand that there's always unexpected things and unplanned things that come up, but there should be a process for that. And what is that process? And who has the authority to say okay, and what dollar threshold? Say, can the president approve, or when does it need to go maybe to the board or an executive committee or something like that? So just things to consider. Another important element for the financial side is I've listed it as an annual audit of the financial records. In the accounting world, audit has a very particular meaning, and that's not necessarily what we are referring to. You're not required to hire an outside audit firm to come in and audit your books, but there should be some sort of a review, and it should be performed by someone who's not the treasurer, so someone independent of that. Often clubs just have other people who have financial experience in their club, and they're willing to do that, and they just review some reports and some records and maybe ask questions of the treasurer. But it's a great process to make sure that you're following your own guidelines, and that someone else at least is setting eyes on some of those records and asking questions before everything is final. We mentioned RI dues a couple times, and I think an important factor here, and I'm going to show you another slide just after this, but one of the important elements of this is that the RI dues are determined as of the first of the year and the first of January, first of the Rotary year, 1st of January. So it's really important to be in touch with your club treasurer and your club secretary and make sure that your membership roster is up to date and complete before you arrive at those deadlines, because RI is going to send you a bill based on that membership count. And it's not that they can't ever allow you to change that count, but you're not supposed to, and it's a bit of a process. So it's important to understand those deadlines and what they will mean for the budget. What I did on this might be a little busy and a little small, but when you get the handout, it may make more sense. This is the current Rotary year dues breakdown. So the RI dues are billed out in July and January. And the dues this year are $35 per 6 months. There's a $1 charge for the Council on Legislation. It just helps support that process in Evanston. There's $6 a member charge for the Rotary magazine each 6 months. And then the last two items are really pretty important to talk about. And we'll touch on them again a bit later, but part of your dues pays for directors and officers insurance and general liability insurance for the clubs. And you're paying, $9, $10 of your dues towards that. So there is a benefit there to you, and it does exist. And we'll get more into that later. But just looking at the totals, you quickly realize that on an annual basis, the RI dues are, $93 per member. That's a lot. It's a big piece of budget. And just understanding that, knowing that's why, you know, in part your club dues may be what they are. Important to note for next Rotary year, the RI dues go up 50 cents per 6 months for a total of $1 increase next year. So it'll be $1 more for your years as president. And this is just the RI dues, not anything with your district or other organizations you may support. I think that's all for this section. Any questions coming, Ralph?
Scott, could you maybe comment on club's use of PayPal and Venmo?
I could comment, I guess. I think, yeah, you know, times have changed, and I think more and more clubs have created some sort of a paperless payment mechanism, whether it's, you know, something like PayPal that's been around for a while, or Cash App like Venmo. It facilitates getting paid. It can be a big help for the club to be able to allow people payment that way. But, you know, someone has to take charge and be responsible for that process and the reporting. There are sometimes, I'm not going to say I'm totally familiar with each payment mechanism, but just like credit card processing, there's often fees and costs associated with some of that. So be aware of that and consider that when your club is looking to maybe adopt one of those payment policies. And you know, determine in advance what types of items you can pay that way, because you may not want you know, a couple of happy dollars coming in, you know, through Venmo that you've got to keep track of. You might want to limit it to dues or fundraiser type things, but there are a lot of different options out there today for how you can, you know, get paid, and especially with clubs that might be, you know, still having a combination of virtual with in-person meetings. It makes it a lot easier for people to be able to support the club financially if they can pay it electronically.
Okay.
All right, we'll move on. Doug, want to jump in on the tax topic?
I don't know why you picked me to talk about taxes, Scott. I only done this 33 years, right? So go figure that CPAs would be talking about taxes on March 3rd. Go figure. So anyway, yeah, one of the responsibilities that each Rotary Club has to do is they have to file a tax return, just like you do individually. You file your 1040 by April 15th every year. Actually, you get till April 18th. You get 3 extra days this year. But anyway, each Rotary Club does have to file the 990 series of tax forms that the IRS has. And, you know, each club, it's all based on your gross receipts, you know, but bottom line is it's got to be done at the end of the Rotary year. You get 5.5 months from the end of that year. So the due date is November the 15th. And if you don't have enough time to gather all your records and get that done in that time window, you can file for a automatic 6-month extension with the IRS. They will grant that pretty much automatically. Really no questions asked. As I said, which form you file is generally going to be based on gross receipts. And what I mean by gross receipts is it's you know, basically all your gross receipts, from your profit and loss statement, however you keep track of your income and expenses on your club, but basically your dues revenue, your gross fundraising revenue. Nothing's really netted. You know, it's not going to be a chicken barbecue income less the expenses and a net profit. It's going to be the gross sales, the gross revenue from a fundraiser. So all your happy dollars and fines and all that is considered gross receipts. So for the IRS test. So if your club comes in normally under 50,000 in your you know, June 30th fiscal year period, you file what they call a 990N, which in our world we just call it the postcard filing, because basically it's pretty much like a postcard. You answer, you know, 5 or 6 questions, just kind of make an affirmation, a attestation to say that you've met the requirements Their receipts are under 50,000 and so on. And, basically just file it. And that's all done either through an IRS website. You can set up a user account with irs.gov and file that, or obviously, you can hire someone like Scott or I to prepare it for you as well, especially if it gets more complicated, like the 990 EZ, which is probably about an 8-page form, or if your club really gets into the higher level of gross receipts, you have to file the 990, which could pretty much be 50, 60 pages potentially, with different schedules and reporting requirements. So my guess is that most of you out there won't have that situation. It's probably most likely to be the N postcard or maybe the EZ. So hopefully, as I said, that most clubs are not usually going to have the 990 issue, because that is quite even for us as CPAs, it's quite a detailed tax filing. So
Hey, Doug, I just want to jump in quick. Just kind of correct, I think you misspoke about a thing. You mentioned the due date as being 5.5 months. It's 4.5 months after the June year end, which we all do the same thing. We're thinking of May 15th, but it's not that. So for a June year-end Rotary Club, which is what most follow, that original due date is November 15th. So
I was just making sure you're listening, Scott. So.
I know.
So, okay. So one of the reasons, why does a Rotary Club have to file? Well, basically, one of the things is RI. First and foremost, most of your Rotary Clubs are what we call social welfare organizations. So we're set up under the IRS code 501c4. Basically, each club is tax exempt under RI's group exemption ruling, which means, basically means each club has to file, going back to those various 990 series of forms. Basically, most clubs might think they don't need to file, but yes, they do. RI does require it. And I think if they even find out that you didn't file, that might cause some issues with RI for that club. So obviously it's very important. And one thing I we didn't mention in our slide, but I kind of came to thought is, if any organization that's a chair or a 501c type entity, in order to keep your tax exempt status, you need to file every year with the IRS. And if 3 years consecutively go by and you do not file, the IRS will automatically pull your tax exempt status. So, so basically, RI really mandates that each club file. But even if someone kind of turned a blind eye to that from a perspective of the Rotary Club, if you don't file 3 years in a row, that your Rotary Club would automatically lose its tax exempt status with the IRS. So that's how important it is. So we all know that none of you will have that happen. I'm sure most of everybody's clubs are all up to date and all that. But one other important thing, being that we are CPAs, we do personal tax returns. Sometimes wording is very important. So people like to make contributions to their favorite charity. But keep in mind that a Rotary Club, at least under the 501c4, which our clubs are, technically it's not a tax deductible contribution, because we're not a 501c3 entity, which is the not-for-profit charitable type organization like the Red Cross, or some Rotary Clubs even have a charitable organization, a 501c3. But so there again, just keep that distinction. Any contributions that you make to the club thinking you might get a tax write-off, technically it's not deductible as a charitable contribution under IRS rules. Another important thing with Rotary Clubs, there's a misconception sometimes that we're a tax exempt entity. Our Rotary Club's tax exempt, so we don't have to pay sales tax. That's incorrect. There again, only a 501c3 charitable organization usually has that privilege of not having to pay sales tax. So in other words, when you purchase anything, you have to pay sales tax on it. You don't get a tax exemption on your purchases. And even technically, when we do a fundraiser, for example, when we buy the chickens for our chicken barbecue, we're supposed to pay the sales tax on that. We're not we're not going to say we're tax exempt, so we don't have to pay for it. So that's an important distinction that many people don't understand. And I mentioned 501c3. We have that with a question mark. So reason we did that is there again, it's very important to know the distinction between a traditional Rotary Club that we have, the 501c4 social welfare organization. But obviously, many of us have heard of 501c3s that we do make tax deductible contributions to, like your American Red Cross, American Cancer Society, so on and so forth. And as I said, some Rotary clubs do have a 501c3 setup so that members can make contributions. And obviously, a perfect example too that I can't forget, the Rotary Foundation. When you make your contribution to the Rotary Foundation for the annual fund, the Polio Plus Fund, so on, you get a tax write-off for that because the Rotary, that Rotary Foundation is a 501c3 entity and it can accept tax deductible contributions. So on that, I didn't know if anything you wanted to add, Scott or Ralph?
Yeah, I just wanted to,
Oh.
one of the things I think sometimes clubs find themselves, falling in that category of being unsure if their tax filings have been done and are complete and up to date. And, the first best way to check on that is just within your club, what records are there to back that up. But if it's uncertain, and that happens when maybe a treasurer becomes, ill or something, and you're just not sure where the records are, and, there is a way to look it up. Sometimes the IRS isn't completely up to date with the most recent year, but they're maybe a year behind. So there are ways that can be identified and checked on in case you're really nervous that you haven't, maintained your filing status. And as Doug mentioned, if you go 3 consecutive years without filing, the IRS can revoke your exempt status, which then means you're a taxable entity, and that's just a bad consequence. And then you have to go through a number of procedures to get that back. So again, just more of an awareness that to be sure that it's done annually, and whether the treasurer's taking care of that or the president's signing the form, have an awareness that those things are being done. Any questions, Ralph?
Yeah, a quick question. If a club has a district designated funds grant, should that be kept in a separate account?
Yeah, I would think that may make sense. I don't know that it's a requirement on either end. And I think one of the distinctions I would identify is whether the grant is funded to the club after the project is complete, and it's just they're being awarded that at the end. So there's really no record keeping element left. You've already done all that, or whether you're receiving money, either upfront or during the project, where you're still accountable for how that's being handled. In that case, I think a separate account probably makes a lot of sense for most situations, and it's certainly an easy way to be confident the funds are maintained separately and identified, and the records are easily accessible.
This is Denise, and I think that it may not matter for district designated grants, but for global grants, you have to have a separate account for the global grant if your club is going to go.
Yeah, very good point. I believe typically if it's actually Rotary Foundation funds that you are handling, they require a separate bank account. Anything else?
Nope, I think you're good.
All right, we'll move on. I'm the only thing left between you and I don't know, whatever comes next tonight. For me, it's dinner, but we'll talk a little bit about risk management. There's not an awful lot here, but there might be a little bit more in terms of talking points. But what do we really mean by risk management? And, I've put up some definitional things, but really just a process to aim to identify causes of potential losses and try to determine how you could mitigate or lessen the impacts of those losses. And so real simply evaluate what can go wrong, what can happen. And consider modifying the types of activities you're performing to lessen that risk. I think, a couple ways that you can do that are sometimes you need to use a contract or an agreement. We were just talking about grants, whether it's a district grant or a global grant. There are contracts. There's grant applications, and that's basically a contract. They're identifying the rules and procedures you have to follow. Clubs can do the same thing. You might engage in a fundraiser or a project with another club or another organization, and you should have a clear understanding of responsibilities on each side. Doug was just involved, however he landed the job, trying to arrange the facilities for our Newark Rotary Pancake Breakfast, which we have hosted in our high school here. And so just going through that process of contacting, the right people at the school to get the permissions. They require you prove of insurance and things like that. So it's good to make sure that you know who's responsible for what. And just, some of those examples as well. You've got your club meetings at, some public venue, whether it's a restaurant or a church hall or whatever it may be. But who's responsible for things that go on during your meeting, after your meeting, before your meeting? Your fundraisers are probably out in the public many times, may involve other people, family members, Interact students, other community members. What are the issues related to that? And working on projects. It's one thing if you're picking up trash, maybe not the most dangerous, but if you're, putting roofing on a gazebo or something like that, people are using tools, climbing ladders. You want to be sure that you understand what those risks and things are, and make sure that the right people have the right tools to do the jobs that they're engaged to do. Occasionally, you should consider whether you do have a need to engage with professional, legal or insurance advisors about what might need to be done. Ralph was introducing Doug and mentioning the RL Concessions Group. It was a collaboration of 4 clubs running a business activity. And in that environment, they had their own insurance to cover the activities that they conducted annually. So just being aware of that. Sometimes those partnerships for activities might rise to the level where you want to get some extra input. But with that said, and this was mentioned earlier, all clubs in the U.S. are automatically covered by Rotary's general liability and directors and officers liability insurance through the RI dues and the program that's arranged, by Rotary. So that's included in what you pay for. It covers you from, a significant amount of risk, and it doesn't require most clubs to actually go out and pay for any additional insurance for the typical normal Rotary Club activities. I put this information up in the slide, just a little bit more, and you'll get these in handouts so that you can have it as a reference, but you can obtain a certificate of insurance directly from the vendor, which is Gallagher Insurance. They're also available for questions and advice on things, so you can navigate to that and get some assistance if you need to. You can contact them directly. There is an email and phone and their website. And again, that'll all be in your materials so that you don't have to worry about trying to grab that now. But usually my understanding is some club officers, possibly president, secretary, treasurer, have some of this information communicated to them at the beginning of the Rotary year based on their position. So someone in your club has been or will be notified of this and how they can access some of these resources. So it's important to be aware of it and to know who in your club is going to grab that certificate of insurance before you go do your fundraiser at the high school. And with that, I think that's the program. I'm glad to open up for questions.
Yeah, we do have one. Do you know of a best practice procedure if a club is working with another 501c organization? Is it recommended to have a formal contract?
I would just say that probably depends on, the actual circumstances and it could be very small scale and maybe it doesn't need to be, but I think, most of us in our day-to-day lives are in, some positions where we deal with the same kinds of questions. And that's where if you really think you have a question, if you've got an attorney in your club, ask the question. If you've got an insurance rep in your club, ask them the question. Get a little bit of free advice from our great volunteers first. And I think, Ralph, as Hill Cumorah was when, there was a contract with the church to conduct the activity on church grounds. I think the circumstances will dictate how formalized that may need to be.
Yeah,
And
because of the
depending on,
extent of that operation, it was a very formal contract. One other quick question. Do you know, should a club get a fresh certificate of insurance for each of their activities?
I don't think you need to do it for each activity. You probably would want to make sure you get one, in each Rotary year because it's probably endorsed and it probably has, some sort of policy term on it. And, anyone using that would want to rely on that information.
Okay. I don't have any more questions in chat. If Denise wants to actually unmute everybody, and if there's any other additional questions, but again, one of our goals with doing this multi-district leadership development was to keep it within an hour. And so far we've been very successful in doing that. And because of the efficiency of your presentation this evening, we are definitely going to meet that. So.
There was a question that came in. I don't know if you saw it or not, about our individual members covered under the Rotary umbrella, the Rotary Insurance umbrella during any activities. And I do believe the answer is yes. It's anybody who is a member of the club or volunteering with your club at the time.
Yeah, I believe that under the general liability and the D&O, they're covered to that extent, yes.
Yeah. Okay, if we have no more questions, I would like to thank Scott and Doug for a great presentation, very informative. I think it should be very helpful to all incoming presidents. And I would just like to, on behalf of my fellow DGEs, Denise, Rocky, Jerry, and our fearless leader for the Empire Multi-District Pets area, Deb Gleason, just thank everyone for the attendance that we've had over these 4 sessions. This was a experiment that we wanted to try. We thought it would be helpful. We thought this would be a great venue to do it in, utilize Zoom and do it over a multi-district area. And as you saw, we have some great talent and volunteers that have stepped up from each district to make these presentations interesting and informative. So again, from all of us, thank you very much for attending.
And just one final reminder, if you have not yet registered for MD Pets in Syracuse, please do so. The links for all of these sessions will be shared as well as posted on the MD Pets website. So if you missed one, or if you want to share one of these with your club members for them to see, for other leaders, please do so. Thank you. Can't wait to see most of you in a couple of weeks in Syracuse. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Denise.
Thanks, Scott.